Alright, I feel more and more unprepared every time I hit the stream button, but gotta do it. Gonna be doing some roll for question once that timer hits. Let me just get set up. You know, I should probably get some music of some kind for this countdown. I haven't thought about that until just now. That would be a good idea. Let me write that down. Alright, this is Roll for Question, where a veteran DM answers your questions about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Question that I hear very often, and is a bit of my pet peeve, honestly. My players are too slow. How do I make my combats faster? This question really bothers me. It's very common, and there are a lot of people that have answers to this question, and a lot of those answers are bad. They're just bad answers, and some of those answers are okay, but they're not great, and we'll go over them right now. So, advice that I hear, use a timer. Using a timer is not something that I would recommend for two reasons. I'll get into the details of why this is bad in just a moment, but using a timer is a bit punishing your player in a passive aggressive way, and using a timer doesn't really solve the problem. It just kind of masks it. Other advice that I hear: ask your players to go faster. Ask them to be mindful of their time. Tell them they're taking too long. Now, there are situations where a player is taking too long. If they get distracted, if they're not playing the game anymore, like if they're on their phone during their turn, which is incredibly rude, or if they're chatting with someone else about something that's not the game, it's okay to, get their attention, tell them, hey, it's your turn, what are you doing? You know, focusing them is fine. Asking them to be faster is not helpful. That does not make players faster. That does not make players take their turns faster. It doesn't. It makes them annoyed, resentful, maybe, not faster. I mean, if it did make them go faster, that would just be in the book. You would just that would just be like standard how to play this game. If you're a dungeon master and it's a player's turn, tell them to go faster all the time. Like, that's not in the book. You won't find that advice in the book anywhere. You won't find that advice in the DMG. You'll find, in fact, quite the opposite of that. Some really bad advice that I hear is to give the player suggestions on what they can do on their turn. Now, if a player is brand new and they ask for help, help them. Absolutely, 100%. That's good. If a player's turn is coming up and they're taking too long and you start telling them, maybe you should try doing a smite, or maybe you should try hitting this guy, that is generally not fun for that player. Generally, you are going to ruin that player's experience. And even if it made the game faster, which I'm not convinced it does, but even if it did, is that worth it? I don't think so. Another advice that I hear: use digital tools to run the combat for you. Now, what this advice boils down to is play a video game, which is not great advice. This advice assumes that the players aren't already using digital tools, or that using digital tools is an option. So if you're at the physical table, it's not really an option. You know, we're not going to break out laptops just to make combat go slightly faster, just to let Roll20 run it faster, or D&D Beyond. Like, that's just not good advice. I also hear talk faster. Tell your players to talk faster, narrate less, do less descriptions, just get through the combat. And that makes this seem like something that you're doing out of obligation rather than out of fun. This combat is something that you need to get through as fast as possible. So, is that true? If that's true, maybe the problem isn't with the narrations. Maybe the problem is with combat. Now, narrating can be tedious if you're doing too much of it, but is that really what's making your game slow? That's usually advice that's given to players that didn't even ask. Like, my game is too slow. Well, have you tried role playing less? Like, okay. Other advice that I hear that is, it's fine, but it doesn't solve the problem, but there's nothing wrong with it. When the players' turns are coming up, let them know ahead of time. Tell them, all right, it's your turn. It's player A's turn. Player B, you're on deck. Okay, that's fine. You know, let people know that their turn is coming up. Let them plan ahead. That doesn't really solve the root problem. There's nothing wrong with it. Other advice that I hear: roll your dice all at once at the beginning of your turn. So if you're attacking, roll your damage dice when you roll your attack dice. That might save a few seconds. Nothing wrong with that, but it's also not really the problem. You could also pre-roll your dice, which, I mean, sure, save a few seconds. Is that fun? I don't particularly see that as a solution, and I like rolling dice, so I don't know. I don't like that advice, but it's nothing wrong with it. It's technically true. It's worth noting that this is a problem that even the Dungeon Master's Guide acknowledges. And the advice that the Dungeon Master gives isn't good advice. It suggests things like, tell your players the stats of your monsters so that they know up front what they're dealing with. I don't know how that makes anything faster. That doesn't seem like it makes anything faster at all. Try giving your players recaps when their turn starts. Now you're adding the Dungeon Master having to recap the turn. That seems like it would make combat slower. And also, that shouldn't help if the players are paying attention. That seems like it's solving the problem of, what if my players aren't paying attention? If my players aren't paying attention, give a recap at the start of their turn. But that's not the question we're answering. Another thing that the Dungeon Master's Guide recommends is use an initiative tracker, which, okay, it's not terrible advice, but that's the same energy as telling the players when they're on deck, when their turn is coming up, you know? It's fine. I don't think it solves the problem, because the problem isn't people don't know when their turn is. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide also recommends rolling all your dice all at once. So that's the same advice as rolling your attack dice and your damage dice together. It's fine. But I don't think these solve the problems, because for a lot of us, I feel like the experience is combat takes at least 40 minutes to get through, maybe more, maybe an hour 30, probably not an hour 30, right? No one's having an hour 30 combat, but at least an hour. That's probably not unheard of, and it would be nice if combat were a lot faster than that. If it was something like 20, 25 minutes to run through combat, maybe even faster than that, 15 minutes. That might be too fast, but something faster than 45 minutes, and shaving off 1 or 2 minutes doesn't get you there. And when we take it from that perspective, we need to understand the root cause of why is combat slow to begin with, because that is how we're going to understand how to solve it. Now, it's worth noting that there are other parts of this game other than combat, and combat is slow. Are other parts of this game slow? Sometimes. I have certainly seen shopping episodes where the entire game is people buying because buying stuff takes 2 hours. That happens. There are times when you have a conversation in game that has gone on for far too long, 30 minutes plus. There are times when the party is at a door and they are spending at least 30 minutes opening that door. So this isn't just a problem unique to combat, but it's worth pointing out that in those other situations that I described, the players are usually playing the game like they're invested in what's happening. Like there's no one is sitting around waiting. The problem is that they're losing focus. That is it's a different. There's a different solution to that than the problem with combat. With combat, the whole structure of the game is turn-based. It's a turn-based game, and it's important to recognize that when it's your turn, you have the spotlight. When it's not your turn, you are watching. You are not doing anything. You have an option to make a reaction, but that is very rare, and that is not the norm. So that is what separates combat from other parts of the game and how we're going to analyze it. Combat is not real time, and could it work real time? I don't know. That doesn't really make sense to me. If combat was something where it's everyone's turn all at once and you're all rolling dice all together and whoever rolls the dice the fastest, like that. No, that probably doesn't work. Or if it does, you need to put some designer mojo behind it. It wouldn't work out of the box. We couldn't just say, okay, Dungeons and Dragons combat, we're real time now. We're skipping initiative. Everyone go all at once. That wouldn't work. Combat is a pile of tactical decisions. That is the core of what makes combat. You are a dude on a miniature board, or if you're playing Theater of the Mind, you are imagining a location, an environment. You are in one part of that environment, and you have hostile forces in a different part of that environment. And what do? You have a lot of options. You have your character has a bunch of powers and abilities that they can use in combat. You can move around. You can interact with the environment. Combat is a pile of tactical decisions. Those decisions are a good thing. That is considered part of the fun of combat. If combat was just you can only attack and do nothing else, that would be less fun. That would be less enjoyable. You like having decisions to make. So removing decisions, not the solution. And this is a turn-based game, and putting a time limit on that is it's un-turn-based, and it's also putting a time limit on the amount of fun that the players are able to experience. When it's not your turn, you don't really get to make decisions. You can think about decisions, but that only goes so far. Especially when other people are making decisions that change your thinking. You're only able to really make decisions on your turn. And putting a time limit on that is opposite that. It's also important to keep in mind, some players are just slow. Some players are just slow. They have what is colloquially known as analysis paralysis. You have a bunch of decisions. Which one do you choose? There's lots of options. Which one are you going to pick? Some people freeze up at that, and that is normal, and you can't solve. There's no solution to that I know of. There's no like medical treatment. There's no like yell at your player to make them make a decision. That doesn't really work. Some players are unable to process the game when it's not their turn. They can't think about what decisions they want to make because they only have so much focus, and they are presumably focusing on the game and not on themselves. Because if they focus on themselves, they can't focus on the game. If they focus on the game, what's happening on the battle map, like, okay, that's it's just not happening. That's just how it is. Some players just don't have that ability. And it's important also to point out that if you're a DM and you're making a combat, hopefully you are trying to make that combat with some tactical depth involved. You want to make this combat more interesting than just throwing some bad guys at the enemy on a flat, featureless environment with no discernible character. You want to make it feel alive. You want to make it feel different. You want to make it feel unique. You want to get your players thinking. That's kind of what you see as a good combat. And we have to accept that if you're going to add depth to your combat, players need to digest it. When it's their turn, they need to think about all of the options that you have put on the table for them to look at. If you start adding, like, if you have a combat with ogres, okay, the player's going to have a pretty normal, we run up to the ogres and we hit them. Okay, what if you add a pit between you and the ogres? Okay, now you have to think about this pit. How are you going to get across it? How are the ogres going to get across it? What options do I have to meet this pit? Okay, it's a little more complicated. It takes a little more brain power to figure out what's going on. It makes combat a little slower, but we want the depth. We don't want to surrender the depth just because combat is too slow. And we can keep going on. We can keep going on. What if we take this theoretical combat? What if we add ballista to it on both sides of the pit? So the ogres have ballista, and the adventurers, the party has ballistas. How are they going to handle that? Okay, and we made this even more complicated. All right, and what if we make this happen during a rainstorm? And what if there's a bunch of, like, what if there's a tidal wave coming, and we can just throw more and more elements into this combat until it's absolutely stuffed, and maybe it's getting a little overstuffed and is no longer getting interesting. But every element we add to make the combat hopefully more interesting is also going to make it go slower. And we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where our only choice is to make combats as flat, featureless, and boring as possible just so people can get through combat. All right. Unfortunately, there is no easy solution to this problem. Unlike a lot of other problems that D&D has faced, this one is very much rooted in the design of the system and is very difficult to change. There's no, like, oh, it's simple. Initiative, just don't roll the dice and then everything is fast. Oh, combats are slow, just use this one monster and everything's fast. There's no solution. So at some level, bad advice is the best that we can do. And that's sad, but okay, that's the reality. We just have to accept that that's how the game is designed. And for some tables, like, that's all you need. Just accept that the combat is slow. That's life. There are some options in the Dungeon Master's Guide for alternatives that are intended to speed up the game. So there's an alternative initiative system known as pre-rolling. It's known as initiative scores, which is just basically pre-rolling your initiative. It's not pre-rolling your initiative. It's taking a passive initiative score and using that. That doesn't really speed up the game, but it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so I'm saying it here. There's also side initiative, which is every player goes at the same time, and then every monster goes at the same time. Now, this kind of opens up the idea of breaking down the turn-based paradigm that is D&D combat. It doesn't, but if the players can go in any order, why can't they just go all at once? You know? This option was removed from the newest Dungeon Master's Guide. You won't find it if you look, at least as far as I know. But it is in the old book, so. There's also something called speed factor, which does not help at all. So I'm just not going to talk about it. It does not make the game faster at all. And I don't think it's trying to. It makes initiative more complicated. So, how do other games tackle this problem? In particular, how do board games tackle this problem? Because board games are turn-based games. A lot of board games are turn-based games. They have the same problem, and how do they deal with it? Well, the easiest solution that board games have is they limit the game size. You can only have up to 4 players at a lot of board games. And one of the reasons is because if you have more than that, then the game takes forever. Now, can we do that for D&D? Probably not. Can we make it so that you can only have 3 players at the table? And any more than that, and your game sucks? I don't think that'll fly. I don't think that'll work. So, kind of have our hands tied there. Another thing board games do is give spectators, people whose turn it isn't, give them something to do. Give them more opportunities to intrude on the game and do stuff. And even if that makes the game slower because people are constantly interrupting, at least people are participating. So there's less need for your turn to be the only source of fun. Well, what I mean by that is earlier we said that decisions are fun, and limiting your turn is putting a limit on that fun. If you have more ways to interrupt when it's not your turn, you have more opportunities to get fun when it's not your turn. It gives you a little more freedom to put a cap on how much fun people are having on their turn by capping their turn. Another option that board games do is to just make the game more spectatable. When it's not your turn, you don't care because there's so much happening that you don't mind that it's not your turn. You'd rather it not be your turn for a long time because it's just it's fun. And obviously the way we do that is we go to our players and we tell them to be more entertaining. Have you tried being Matthew Mercer? Yeah, get right on that. Probably not going to fly in D&D, but well, other way that board games kind of tackle this problem, they restructure the game to reduce the amount of waiting time that there is. It's not your turn? Well, it's your turn now. You know? Less time waiting on your turn, the more time you're having fun. Doing that is not simple either. In Dungeons & Dragons, that requires big changes to how initiative works. That requires players to be able to act independently because otherwise we have a bottleneck, and that bottleneck is the Dungeon Master, and we can't give the Dungeon Master more attention span, we can't give them more focus. So the only way that we can really squeeze more seconds out of our combat is to put less demand on the Dungeon Master. All right, so that's what board games in general kind of do to solve this problem. And there are a lot of board games out there, and some of them have better solutions than others. And digging deeper into how they handle that is a very interesting topic that is less and less useful the deeper down you go in terms of making Dungeons and Dragons combat faster. But there are also other tabletop games. We can probably learn from those a little better. So how do other tabletop games handle their combat? And some systems have Dungeons and Dragons initiative whole cloth, and we can't fault them for that, but that's not really helpful for us. That doesn't make our combat, that doesn't give us opportunities to learn how to make our combat faster. In some games, like Powered by the Apocalypse games, there's no initiative system at all. In fact, combat is resolved the same way you resolve everything else. You want to sneak by these guards? Run through the sneak system. You want to fight these guards? Roll the fight system, It's the same rolls, it's the same energy, it's the same speed. You can get through that stuff really fast if the players are focused. Yeah. Something that Fantasy Flight games do. They use an initiative system that is kind of similar to Dungeons & Dragons, but they're a little more flexible with how they handle things. So your players can go in any order. You roll initiative and you create a player slot, and anyone can go in that player slot. So you can basically you can swap initiative with your party as much as you want, endlessly. And this does speed things up because it lets people who are ready go immediately, and it lets people who need more time to plan their turn, gives them more the opportunity to ask for more time. There are other systems out there that have fancy initiative systems. Some of them better than others. I think one notable one that I can think of is Shadow of the Demon Lord, which has the fast and slow initiative system. You can go now, but if you do, you have less actions. Or you can go later, and if you do, you get a full turn. So same energy, where we're letting players who are ready go now, and we're letting players who need more time to think go later. And we keep that in mind while we're approaching this problem. We need to think of the bottlenecks in the system that are slowing the game down. So the reason combat is slow is because it's limited by two things: the Dungeon Master's time and the active player spotlight. You can't go when it's not your turn, and you can't resolve anything without the DM. And there's only one DM, and they can't do everything. I mean, they have to do everything, but they can't do everything quickly. So, how do we think about that when we're thinking about solutions to this problem? We can't give the DM more time. We're not time lords. But we can reduce the amount we need to have the DM's time for. If we ask the DM, hey, I need help with this one thing, maybe at the same time this other player can resolve their own stuff that doesn't need DM attention. Let them go. Let them get out of the way. That is not something that is easily done in Dungeons & Dragons. That requires retooling parts of the game, probably, and that is not something that I can just suggest to a new player. Rebuild the game. Unfortunately, that's not on the table. But it is an option if we are willing to re-engineer this game. Find ways to let players run combat without the DM. At least parts of combat without the DM. Free them up. We can also increase the amount of active player spotlight. So only one person can go. Everyone else has to wait. But that's not like written in stone anywhere. There's no reason you couldn't have multiple active players go at the same time, especially if you sort of design combat in a way to facilitate that. So like, for example, maybe there's a system in place that lets two or more players combine their turns into one turn if they really wanted to, for like some sort of teamwork play. That kind of thing speeds combat up. You have multiple players resolving their turn in the same time that it would take one player. You'll have fewer people that you're waiting on. Combat will go faster. Also think about ways to let ready players go now. Let the players that need more time go later. As said earlier, some players are slow. We can't make them faster. We can't yell at them to go faster. We can't like do brain surgery on them to go faster. They're just slow. Like that's just we're not all strategy gods, and we don't all have mega gamer brains. And that's fine. And the game system should account for that by letting the mega gamer brains sort of take the wheel when they're ready. And then when the slow players finally get around to being ready, let them jump in. Let the combat pace a little better as a result. And so I've mentioned the initiative system a lot. It works fine in small games. D&D, it's not a small game. Initiative, it's kind of holding combat back. And what can we do about that? Not much, besides ripping it out. And that's, I don't know. That's not something you can just tell new players. You could try adding incentives for the players to be faster. Obviously, don't punish players for being slow. That is not fun. That is very adversarial. Your players are going to hate you if you do that. But adding incentives to be fun, that's different. Or adding incentives to be fast, that's different. That's not punishing, that's rewarding. What does that look like? I don't know. I don't know how to do that in D&D. Maybe there's a homebrew system. Someone has done this. I don't know. Someone would need to design that. Maybe you could give out inspiration if you're fast, but I feel like that's not really what inspiration is designed for. And that results in people taking fast turns just to get inspiration at the expense of making good turns. Yeah, gotta design something. So yeah, now that we've said all that, what do we tell new players who want to make their combats faster? Sorry. And that's on some level, you just gotta, you can try setting a timer. You can try rolling your dice with other dice. You can just skip rolling dice entirely. It's a hard problem to solve. It's not a good answer. There's no good answer. You can accept that D&D is just slow. And if you want fast combat, maybe you need to play a different game. Maybe you can find a way to make it faster. Maybe there's a solution that no one's thought of yet. Come up with it. Share it with the rest of us, please. Save our games. I don't have a good solution. Try out other games. Try out other games. See how their combats work. Try cooking up your own solution. That's all I got for that. It's a fun question, though, and it's a very reasonable question to ask. I have the same question all the time, and I've been playing this game for decades. Why is combat so slow? Why are people pulling out their phones when it's not their turn? How do I make them pay attention? Why? How do I make this one player go faster? I don't want to boot them, but they're my friend, but they go so slow. I don't know. I think it's healthy to be able to say it's not a good solution. Well, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Feel free to leave them in the comments. Happy to answer. I am almost certain that your question will be more answerable than this question, because this is probably the big one for me. Here's a question that I do see come up sometimes, not often, but sometimes, from a new player. I know what fudging is. When should I fudge? That's a fun question. That's a very controversial question, actually, because it's not actually universally accepted that fudging is a good idea. There are a lot of reasons not to fudge, honestly, and I am not going to say one way or the other what the correct, objectively correct answer is. I will say that there's a time and place for fudging. There's a time and place for not fudging. And as a new player, you should be careful about how you use it. But let's go over when is a good time to fudge. So if you're a new DM, you're still learning the game. You're still learning what is a good encounter, what is a good story. You might be teaching the players along with learning the game yourself. Players make mistakes all the time, and you step in to correct it, as you should. on the same token, you're going to make mistakes from time to time, and the players probably aren't going to be able to step in and correct it. And so, you do have the option of pausing the game and saying to the players, hey, I made a mistake. We need to roll this back. Blah, blah, blah. I'm still learning. I made a mistake. Sorry. It's fine to admit a mistake to your players. It's fine to pause the game to your players, and it's fine to roll the game back. Your players will appreciate it. Nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it's a bit of a headache, isn't it? Sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth. So what you might do, you might fudge. Now, some people will tell you, no, don't fudge. Always roll back. You'll have to decide that yourself. But if you put the players in a situation that they shouldn't be in, and you're asking them to make rolls that they shouldn't be making, it's okay, and they make rolls, and those rolls are going south, it's okay to make those rolls actually go north just to get the game back on track. It's okay if the players should have been able to pick that lock. They should have been able to go into that next room and bypass this fight. But you made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We're all human. Players are now fighting some guards that they're not supposed to be fighting. And you realize that maybe on round 3 of the fight. Well, it'd be really hard to roll this fight back. Uncast all the spells that the players cast. Undo the damage. You know what? Just let the guards start missing a lot more. Guards have a little less hit points than you had written down behind the screen. That's fine. That's fine. Get the players back on track. Don't get stuck in this combat for rounds and rounds more. That we realize shouldn't have happened in the first place. Another situation that you might find comes up. Players are new players, and their experience, they're still learning the game, and they're bound to make mistakes, and their mistakes may boil to a head, and those mistakes may cost the game. And for a lot of us, especially veterans, that's fine. Make mistake, suffer, campaign over. That's just how this game works. That's still fun. But that's not for everyone. Some players aren't ready for the game to end yet, especially new players. So you might be tempted if they make a series of mistakes and then they end up face to face with something they shouldn't be fighting, or maybe the ceiling is starting to collapse on them and they don't have an escape path. You might be tempted to water down those consequences through fudging. You might want to give that ochre a sickness so that they're not as strong. You might add a little secret tunnel so that the players can take it to escape the falling ceiling. They made a lot of mistakes, and they, by all rights, should be dead. But they're not. They got away with it. And the thing is, that keeps the game going. That keeps the players having fun. It has a risk if you do that. If you pull punches, players may start to think that making mistakes is actually good. Making mistakes is the way to play this game, and you may find that play style is not as enjoyable for you as a DM. So, fudging comes with a risk of, if you fudge in favor of the players, you are encouraging the behavior that made the players need to fudge on your behalf in the first place. And so that is the risk, but sometimes that's the way it is. And you can manage that if you are putting the players in a situation where they realize that they made a mistake and they got lucky. that they didn't escape consequences because that's just how the game is, that they really should have died. That does mitigate the risk of fudging, but at some point that gets less and less advisable for a new player to deal. It gets less and less advisable for a veteran DM to do. At some point, it's a risky thing, and you should just treat it with care, and you should use it sparingly, just because there's a chance for it to blow up in your face every time. Now, there is another form of fudging that I will never recommend, and I'll just say it here just so you know it exists. But you can fudge against the players. You can decide the players are too lucky. Maybe they have had a lot of good rolls. Maybe they're acting cocky, and they're asking for consequences that you didn't plan for. But, I mean, they're kicking walls all the time, and they're yelling, and they're murdering everyone they see, and you just really want there to be like a trap wall. You want there to be a disguised dragon for them to kick. Don't do that. Resist the temptation to punish them like that. It never ends well. It is a form of fudging. Now, if you've gotten this far and you're wondering, it occurs to me I haven't actually explained what fudging is. And if you're wondering, isn't fudging when you change dice rolls? It's not just when you change dice rolls. It is true that that changing dice rolls behind the screen is a form of fudging. Fudging is any situation when you as the dungeon master change the outcome of a choice, consequence, or effect other than what you had planned. And to be clear, that is something where if you've planned something out, if you're like, all right, when the players knock on this door, I'm going to roll a d20. And if it's an 11 or higher, X happens. If you rate that down, and then you roll a d20, and you roll it like 15, and then you say, well, actually, I didn't want that to happen, and you change your mind, that's fudging. You don't have to roll dice to fudge. Anytime you change what is written down, what is expected, what is any time you change like a natural consequence, that's fudging. It's not intrinsically bad, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous to do that because it devalues the game for you as the dungeon masters, particularly. The players, if they ever find out you're fudging, will immediately lose interest in the game because, like, their decisions no longer matter because they can count on you to just fudge whatever decisions they make. You should never reveal to your players that you're fudging. But even if you don't, which is something you can do, because all of these decisions, the players don't know what you have planned, hopefully. The players are unaware that you have written down behind the screen that if they roll a d8 and they get an 8, something happens. Players shouldn't know that. So if you change it, you're the only one who knows. And there carries a risk if you are not constantly, but if you are changing consequences, that what you write down stops mattering to you. And that could have an impact on your enjoyment of the game, on seeing what happens, you know? If you put a dragon down and you expect the party to fight it, and you know that if the fight goes south, you won't let anyone in the party die, how much are you really enjoying that dragon? Maybe a little less, maybe a little more, I don't know, but it's probably a little less. Something to keep in mind. When you fudge, you are taking the ability to find out what happens in the game away from yourself. All right, I think that answers that. When should I fudge? Yeah. If you have a question, feel free to drop in the chat. Leave a comment. Here's a question. This one's kind of common. What should my first game be? And that is usually in the context of, should I run a homebrew game or should I buy a module? And my advice, just in general for new players, buy a module first. Learn how the game works. Learn from the module, and then once you've gotten through that, absolutely start running homebrew games. Go nuts. And it's worth keeping in mind that if you run a module, you can always change it. You can change it. You can use 90% of the module, change the 10% you don't like. You're still getting benefit from that module. That is perfectly fine. Now, I don't recommend changing stuff when you're a new player, when you're a new DM, because it's the temptation to change things is there when you don't really understand what you're changing, and you might end up changing something that gives yourself a headache in the future. But it doesn't actually take that much experience until you get a grip on the game and you're able to make more informed changes about your game. Now, what module do I recommend in particular? Wizards of the Coast publishes something called the Starter Set. And there's always been a starter set, but it's not always been the same adventure. But the starter set of today is Dragons of Stormwreck Isle. And I don't own it here because I'm not logged in. But the starter set is a good starting adventure. It generally is structured in a way that is easy for you to pick up. It is also structured in a way that is easy for you to teach the game to other players. And it's also structured in a way to where if you make a small change, it shouldn't affect the game. If you feel more comfortable making changes to it's a bit more fluid than some of the more official hardcover modules like Descent into Avernus or Ghosts of Saltmarsh or Out of the Abyss. I don't recommend most of these. Storm King's Thunder. It's very easy to make changes to those adventures that you regret 5 sessions later. Very easy. So it's a lot harder to do that with the starter set because, well, for one, it's a smaller adventure, so you can probably get through it pretty quickly. Even if you do make a mistake, it won't last very long. And two, it's a lot more flexible. It's a lot more sandboxy. It's just easier to change. And I recommend that. Grab that if you have never run a game before and you want to. And don't expect it to be the best game in the world. Don't expect your first game to be the best game in the world. That's just not how it works. Give yourself the grace of being a new DM and running something simple and make your second game the best game in the world, Let the first one just be a learning experience for you and the players. And that's all it needs to be. And you'll have fun. It's fun. It's not a bad game. It's not a bad book either. Okay. Another question that I hear. How do I make a good NPC? What makes an NPC good? And by that, I mean to the players. What makes an NPC compelling to the players? If I want to make NPCs, I want the players to like them, or at least be impressed by them. That is an interesting question. Usually I see this question in the context of someone wants to make a particular character, a particular NPC, and they've made them really cool in the DM's mind. Like they're like this really big, beefy, this big beefy character, or they're based on a character from an anime or they're based on it from a TV show, and they want that character to not feel like they just ripped them from like a. They want that character to feel like they fit into the narrative and not just got thrown in there because the DM thought they were cool. And that is not really, there's not really a good answer to that question. Like, if you want to make your super special awesome character not seem like, what is the word I'm trying to think of? It's escaping my mind. It's not Mary Sue, but it's some overpowered character. DMPC? No, that's not right. Anyway, you can't just make a character that's based on being really powerful and awesome and amazing and the best character, the best NPC, and expect the players to care. That's not how NPCs work. That's not how stories work. What you need to make a good NPC are a couple of ingredients. First of all, you want them to be something that the players can relate to, at least in terms of like something that makes sense to the players. So, making NPCs relatable in some way, making them understandable in some way, giving players some sort of I don't know, what's the word? This isn't my strength. I don't make good NPCs, but NPCs that are something that don't seem out of place, which is hard to describe what makes that kind of NPC. You want an NPC that has strengths and weaknesses. You want an NPC that seems, if they're human, they seem human. If they're an alien, they seem alien. If they're like something else, it gets kind of fuzzy. Like, if you have an NPC that's a living bolt of lightning, yeah, I don't know how to make that seem relatable. I don't know, but that's one thing you need. You need quirks or facts or statements about that NPC that you can kind of build into how they play. So, like, here's an NPC. They're greedy. Okay, that's something. They're greedy, but they hate touching money. Okay, that's what they hate touching money because they think it's disgusting. Okay. So now we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. They're greedy. They hate money. They hate touching money, and they like to wash their hands in blood. All right, I think that's a very particular NPC there now. Okay. There's the quirks add flavor, and they make the NPC stand out more and more. Being powerful is not a quirk. Having power is not a quirk. Having gimmicks in combat is not a quirk. Having like having magic and being good at fighting is not a quirk. It's not a quirk. Good NPCs doesn't take a lot of work to make a good NPC, but the more you invest in them, the better. The more backstory you build for that NPC, the more real they're going to seem, the better they're going to seem. So if you have an NPC that's a throwaway NPC, they don't need background at all to be good, for the players to be like, this is the best guy ever. But it helps. And you don't have to add it immediately, but you know, the sooner you have it, the sooner you can work it into the narrative, the sooner you can work it into at the table. Some NPCs are just some ordinary guy that you put a funny accent on, and the players love that. They're the best NPC. Does that mean a funny accent makes a good NPC? I want to say no, but in my experience, sometimes yes. Be a good actor. That's how you make a good NPC. That's not good advice. I don't know how to be a good actor, but I've seen it work. The best advice that I can give, make a character that's relatable in some way, even if that's difficult. Make a character that has quirks that stand out. And being good at stuff is not a quirk. Yeah. And be a good actor. Be a good actor. That's just the cheat code. That's just the cheat code right there. Have a backstory. Backstory up your NPCs. The more you flesh them out, the better. Yeah, if you have advice on how to make a good NPC, let me know. That's definitely not my strong suit, but maybe it's yours. Love to hear it. Here's another question. New players are just full of endless questions. How do I make a good custom magic item? So not a book, not an item from the book. I want to make something unique that the players have never experienced before. And I want it to be good. How do I make it good? There's no formula for this. There's no do X, Y, and Z and your item will be good. What I'd like to recommend, if you're absolutely new, is to take an existing magic item in the book that has been developed by a game designer and has had some work, and it fits into the game because it's in the game. What you can do, take that item, change it in some small way, see how that plays. Small changes to existing stuff is generally safe and not very interesting, but it does technically be a custom magic item. It's a starting point. As you do that more and more, you can stretch your wings more and more. You can more comfortably design like a weird magic, like a sword that turns into armor, that turns into a bag of holding that you can throw, and if you throw it, it turns into a flying boat. Like, that's wild. Don't make that if you're new to this. If you've been making homebrew for a while, maybe you can make it work. And if you do, you're probably making some gold. What I like to recommend is play a lot of games, read a lot of books, watch a lot of shows, consume a lot of media for inspiration. Use that inspiration to build yourself a palette of both mechanical options and aesthetic concepts for, like, here's a sword, it's also a gun. That's a thing that's not in D&D, but it is present in other systems. And you can use that concept to make a magic item that fits that concept, ends up being unique based on sword gun, gunblade, I think that's what it's called. Use mechanics from other games to piece together what you feel accomplishes that goal. Now, what the heck? Did my stream die? Oh, I hope my stream didn't die. Anyway. What was I saying? Shoot, I lost track of my thought. If you are building magic items, eventually you're going to want it to be balanced. Eventually you're going to want to have the wording correct on it. Eventually you're going to want to have it be cleaned up and polished and ready to go. Maybe you'll get some artwork for it. You don't need that at the very start. At the very start, you just need a concept and you need basic thoughts. A rough draft, if you will. And then what you can do is if you have an idea and you want to see, does this work? You can ask other people, show it to other people, see what they think. You can also just use it. Just play test with it. Put it in your game as a rough draft and see how the players like it. And let them know that it's a rough draft. And let them know this isn't permanent. It's liable to be changed. And watch how the players interact with it. And if they enjoy it, if they're having a lot of fun, and they're like, this is great, this is awesome, and this is balanced, like, okay, there you go, you did it. You made a good magic item. That's it. Just polish it up and give yourself a thumbs up. And if it's not good, that's fine. That's expected. It's a rough draft. It's supposed to be. Change it up. Polish it up. Try again. Keep trying. Keep trying. If you make magic items, some of them are going to suck. Some of them are going to be bad. You just got to accept that. Don't let that stop you. Sometimes you come up with an idea that sounds really good in your head, and then you write it down, and then you read it and you go, maybe I shouldn't have written this down. And then you put it in a game. The players look at it and they go, someone shouldn't have written this down. And then you forget about it. You throw it away. You try again. You know? Players remember the successes and they forget the failures. That's how you cook up good stuff. There's no formula. There's no magic formula for coming up with a good magic item, but practice is probably the closest formula. Keep trying. Experiment. Take existing items that are proven to work and remix them, combine them, disassemble them. Just tinker. Just tinker with the system. You'll build yourself a repertoire for building a good custom magic item. That's how you do it. And it is important to actually test your magic items. Don't just make them and then never test them, because you'll never learn what works and what doesn't. And if you don't learn, you may end up making only bad magic items forever. One thing that I might do in the near future is make some custom magic items on this channel. I might just spend like a time just going through my thought process. I don't know. That could be fun. That could be boring. I'll think about it. Because there's an art to it, and there is an element of applying your experience to it, and there isn't really I don't know. All right. Did I ask this question already? I did. How do I make a good puzzle? That was a less common question, and it's a very thorny question because there are quite a few opinions about this, and what makes a good puzzle probably varies from player to player. So there's no easy answer to this question. It's not a matter of, well, a good puzzle has 3 solutions, and a good puzzle is a word puzzle with pictures, and a good puzzle is something that you can't Google. You know, there's no There's no easy solution to that. What I would caution about making a puzzle is you definitely don't want to make a puzzle where if the players don't answer it, they can't play the game anymore. Like, that's the end. Like, don't make a puzzle where in order to get to the next room, the players must answer that puzzle or they lose the game. You must make sure your puzzle has a fail state. And that fail state isn't the game slams into a wall. That is a very, 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 very common mistake that I see even the hardcovers here makes. This is bad. Don't make puzzles that have to be solved or else, you know? I would recommend either have the solution to the puzzle somewhere. I don't recommend that, but either do that or make it so that the puzzles can be solved in an alternate way, such as if you don't solve this puzzle, then you have to fight these skeletons, and then that's the solution. Like, you get to progress. Have an escape valve for your puzzles, basically. So here's a word puzzle. You must answer these 3 questions, and if you don't, 2 skeletons pop up for every wrong answer, and you have to fight them. I say that, and as I'm saying that, I'm realizing that's probably not a great puzzle either. Failing to answer a puzzle meaning you fight something. Maybe make the players have to spend a resource could be better. Like every puzzle you don't answer, someone has to spend a spell slot. When I think of a good puzzle, I think of a puzzle that takes the players maybe like 5 to 10 minutes to figure out. It's not something they get instantly, and it's not something they get that takes more than an hour. And it's not something to where if they realize the answer, they still have to do work to make the answer work. So there's a lot of fill-in-the-blank puzzles where it's like, here's a hidden message. There's some secret text here. You have to decode it to pass. And the puzzle will tell you the answer, and the answer tells you how to decode this message. I don't like that if you're expecting the players to decode the message, like physically, because they're having to do actual tedious work to solve your puzzle. I also don't like... I just thought of it, and it just escaped my head. To where you have like a maze, and there's a gimmick to solving the maze, but even if you know the gimmick, it still takes like 15 minutes to actually do the solution. I prefer puzzles that don't linger. Prefer puzzles that are solvable with maybe like your first thought is wrong, but your second thought is correct. That kind of energy. How you do that, I have no idea. I don't make good puzzles. Just straight up. I'll just say that. I have not made a puzzle where I was proud of how it turned out. It is an art. It is difficult. Because what I find, and this is from the puzzles in hardcovers, and this is puzzles in homebrew games that I've seen, there are 2 types of puzzles. There are puzzles that you solve immediately. You hear the riddle, you hear the you see the challenge, you see the riddle, you know how to solve it immediately. Like, this puzzle I've heard before, or oh, I know the answer to that. It's a candle, or I don't know, something just clicks. It's not very satisfying when the players get asked a puzzle and they immediately solve it. That just kind of feels like you just hit a speed bump and moved on. The other type of puzzle that I see is when the players get asked to do something and they can't figure it out at all. There's usually no in between. It's either the players figure it out or they don't. Neither of those are good. Obviously, if the players figure it out too fast, it's a speed bump. And if the players don't figure it out at all, the game stops. And, that's kind of an important component to the game being fun, is the game not stopping. And what often I see happen is if the game stops for too long, the DM will start to throw in additional hints that are, in hindsight, definitely not the original part of the puzzle to get the game moving. And you shouldn't have to do that. A puzzle isn't good if you have to fudge it to make it work, That's not good. There's some puzzles are intuitive, some puzzles aren't. What is intuitive in a puzzle depends on player to player. So like light puzzles make a lot of sense to me. Every time I've seen a light puzzle, I figure it out pretty quick. I'm gonna be honest, because light is a fun little key, and it's really easy to make it do stuff that you want to do. Like, to pass this puzzle, you have to do a certain shadow puppet on the wall. Oh, okay, that's easy. I'll do a shadow puppet. Cool. To pass this puzzle, you must only stay in the light. All right, stay in the light. To pass this puzzle, you have to only stay in the dark. Like, obviously, those aren't the exact words, but figuring out that that's what you need to do, it's intuitive to me. It's not intuitive to every player, though. So I can't just say, light puzzles. That's how you make a good puzzle. Make a light puzzle. Word puzzles are my bane. I am not good with words. I am not a wordsmith, a wordologist. If you ask a riddle that's like, tell me what word describes blah blah blah. I am a fish. I am a barrel. I am left-handed. What am I? Like, okay, I don't know. I give up. I can't do those, so I can't say that they're good puzzles because they're not good for me. What I'm trying to say is, what makes a good puzzle? Well, it depends on your players. How do you figure out what puzzles will land with your players? You can't ask them. I don't think that works. You can't just ask players. How do you measure that? That feels like a question that, if there's an answer to it, I don't know it. That is not an answerable question. So how do I make a good puzzle? Good luck. There are probably people who have better advice than I do on that subject. Maybe I should look that up. Why did I write this down and then not look up if other people had answered this question? I spent most of my time this week preparing the combat speed question, because that question matters a lot to me, and I know there are a lot of people that have opinions about that. And all of the other questions that I wrote down, I have like 3 to 5 sentences, and that's it. I did not spend nearly as much time preparing. And I probably should have. Here's a question that I appreciate from new players. I like to see it. How do I get ideas? These are players that clearly want to run a homebrew game, or they want to do something cool. How do you do that? How do you get ideas? What inspires you to make a good game? What is it that encourages the homebrew DM to keep homebrewing? There's a couple of things that I recommend. Getting ideas is partly a matter of exposing yourself to as much fantasy out there as possible. The more stuff you read, the more stuff you watch, the more stuff you encounter, the broader of a pool you will have for drawing from ideas. And that makes it easier and easier and easier to come up with something cool. It's hard to come up with something from pure scratch. From an idea, from nothing, from an idea to a game, that's a very long road. To go from, I watched this cool show and I want to turn it into a game, that's a shorter road. That's probably why you see a lot of games from new DMs that are, this game is based on X. This game is based on Y. It's just a lot easier to build something from your mind, to come up with ideas when you have something to start with. The other thing that I recommend, if you want to get ideas, cultivate a space in your life for ideas. Think of for some people I know, a good way to get ideas is to go have a cup of coffee, go relax your mind, go do something else for like 30 minutes. Reset your brain, basically. So for some people, it's going outside. For some people, it's exercising, going to the gym. Going to the gym gives them ideas. I don't know what it's going to be for you. There's some activity, I'm certain. Maybe you haven't discovered it yet, but there's some activity to where your mind is given a chance to rest. Your mind is given a chance to digest, and then the ideas will start coming. You quiet your mind, the ideas will come. And the final thing that I will say is ideas best come when you are inspired. So, as I said earlier about consume a lot of media, consume a lot of fantasy, find something that inspires you. Put it on your palette. On your the palette, the thing where you put the basic forms of like themes and stuff of your game. When you need ideas, look at your palette. The ideas will come. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the comments. Here's another one that I see all the time. I'm a new DM. My players have found a homebrew class on the internet, or they found a homebrew subclass on the internet. They say it looks balanced. Should I let them use it? A new player and a new DM. I don't know if the player is new, but the DM is new. The DM does not have a lot of experience in judging whether a homebrew is balanced or not. And a player is excited to use a homebrew. This is a tricky question. One that I think has a straightforward answer and then a slightly more subtle answer, a more nuanced answer. The straightforward answer is no. If you're a new DM, keep it simple. That's my recommendation. Anytime you introduce homebrew into your game, you are responsible for the balance of that homebrew. And even though your player is vouching for it being balanced, that's no guarantee that it actually is balanced. And if you don't know if something is balanced, best to err on the side of caution. Now, the more nuanced take I will say is, well, it's twofold. One, is the homebrew from a reputable source? If it's from somebody that the community in general recognizes, That's different than if this is just a homebrew from, I don't know, from somewhere. There is a difference in quality to be aware of. If you pick something that is from someone that the community has established is a homebrewer, there's a better chance of that being okay to use. And you should consider that, because something to keep in mind is if your players are suggesting homebrew to your game, they're probably excited about it, and they're giving you a golden opportunity to give them levers into the game, which, most players find that fun. So if there's a way to make the player, if there's a way you can ascertain this is from a reputable homebrewer, maybe it's fine. You should take that chance if possible, because your player will probably enjoy it. And there's always the caveat that, like, if you bring homebrew into the game, you're responsible for the balance. And if you're a new player, you don't really have the tools to judge whether something is balanced or not. And you probably can't just ask randos on the internet, is this balanced? Because you're not going to get good answers. But if someone has a reputation, you should take that into account and consider that. Do you want to take a risk on this homebrew? It is made by someone who has hundreds of thousands of followers, and they make lots of homebrew, and a lot of people on the internet say, hey, this is actually pretty cool. I have fun with this. My game didn't explode when I used it. If your player is really excited for it, and you see a lot of good things about it online, sure. There's a world where taking that risk makes sense. But don't feel obligated to say yes if you're not 100% confident, or if you're not 99% confident. If you're only 50% confident, 60% confident that this is fine, it's okay to tell the player, hey, I'm a new DM, let's keep it simple. We'll try that next game. Keep that excitement, but give yourself the grace to say no. Because, you're responsible. You no matter what, you are responsible. So if you have to say no, say no. All right. One more question. This one is too common. It's not that common, but it's too common. How do I do good random encounters? What makes a random encounter good is my first question. What would you say makes a random encounter good? Now, something I like to keep in mind, every encounter is an opportunity for you to build your game narrative, to build up the story, to build up some part of your campaign. You don't want to just have actual random encounters in your game, because that's kind of wasted space. It's not space. It's a wasted opportunity for your game. And if you've built a random encounter and it doesn't connect to the campaign at all, no. You need that at a minimum. You should connect to your campaign. So, what a random encounter is you are rolling. You have a table of encounters, and you are rolling on it, and you are picking one at random. And the reason you would do that over just picking an encounter is because you, the DM, get to be surprised by the result. You don't actually know what the players are going to be facing until you roll the dice. And so something to keep in mind is you don't have to roll the dice if you don't want to. You can always just pick And the other thing is, every single option on that table needs to be good. It needs to be an option that you want to have happen. So, building a random encounter table is a lot more work than just picking an encounter. So, how I would recommend, if you want to approach random encounters, buckle up for a lot of work. A lot more work than if you were just pre-planning encounters. Players are going to go through this forest. They're going to encounter goblins. That takes some work. Players are going to go through this forest. They're going to encounter one of 8 things. That takes 8 times as much work. That's what it takes, though. If you do that, the random encounter should be good. That's as simple as that. If you want good random encounters, just make good encounters, then add random to it. Yeah. If you are making encounters that are random, but they're not good, like you go through this forest and some bees happen. Okay. What do you want? That's just an encounter. That has nothing to do with the story or with anything. I mean, I suppose those goblins I mentioned earlier don't intrinsically have anything to do with the story. You've got to build those in. Explain why those goblins are there, what that adds to the game, what that adds to the story, what that adds to the world. If you don't do that, they're just there. When you're building a random encounter table, just build good encounters. That's how you do it. All right. That is my list of questions. So if you have a question out there, feel free to ask. Drop it in the chat. Drop it in the comments. I think next time I do this, I'll probably just make some homebrew items. I'll do that live. That seems fun. I like making homebrew stuff. I like making homebrew magic items. Give a window into seeing what I enjoy. All right, well, I will leave it here. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you all are having a good day out there. Take care, everyone. See you all later.